Hey, what's up, guys? It's Dan from CryptoCamacho.com. And hey, guys, I'm here with Kurt from Crypto Traders Pro. Hey, Kurt, how you doing?
Doing well, Dan. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for coming on the show. I've been super excited to talk to you about cryptocurrency, obviously, about blockchain, about the markets. I want to pick your brain so much. I'm excited to have you on. A long time ago, maybe about 2 months ago at this point, I watched a video of yours, and I think it was the first time I ever saw you. And you were talking about something called Operation Dragon Slayer, and I was kind of blown away by the video, blown away by the theory, if you will. And it was at the time when Bitcoin Cash was splitting, right? Splitting into
Yep.
Bitcoin ABC and Bitcoin SV. And you kind of had this whole theory and philosophy. And I wanted to get you on the show, not only to talk about that, but just to pick your brain on your business, on, what you do in the crypto markets, what you think the sentiment is, so forth and so on. So I'd love to
Sure.
just kind of dig into it. And maybe first, maybe just give me a little background about you, who you are, what you do, how you got into crypto, things like that.
That's a long story. Parts of it are anonymized for my own safety. But I got into Bitcoin in 2012. I was a libertarian activist, super anti-bank bailouts, all of that thing. I was a Ron Paul volunteer in 2004 and 2008. So I got into all of that stuff. I was very political. I came to realize people don't actually care so much about politics if it doesn't affect them directly.
Yep.
And somebody in 2012, I actually don't remember who, and it really sucks because I get asked this all the time. I don't remember who told me about Bitcoin the first time, but it was somebody at probably a rally or something somewhere. I started buying Bitcoin in 2012,
Okay.
and then I opened my Coinbase account in 2013. So that's my first record that I can verify. Okay, I definitely bought Bitcoin in 2013,
Sure.
but I know it was a little earlier than that. It's all just a little fuzzy from that time period. But
How did you buy Bitcoin in 2012? I'm just kind of curious because the first time I bought it was through Coinbase, right? I mean,
sure, you used to have to wire money to. I want to say it was not Ukraine. Maybe it
Okay.
was Ukraine. So you used to have to
Wow.
wire money to a bank account like Western Union, send money to some crazy account. And I'm like, the first time it's like, all right, I'm going to send $100,
Yeah.
see what happens
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
And it all worked out. It was like,
Wow.
okay, crazy. And then there were a few. I used local Bitcoins, and I would buy stuff person to person. Like you can just do paper wallets, that kind of thing too.
Yep.
But I was super into it early. I thought it was cool. I felt like a spy or something,
Yeah.
buying crazy internet money. And then ultimately, yeah, I got a Coinbase account and became a real person. But yeah, so then just did that. Was in the crypto space. I'm an entrepreneur. Otherwise, I own another couple of businesses actually. But just kept buying Bitcoin. Stayed involved. I wanted to always use it in my business. My printing company that I own accepted Bitcoin starting in 2014.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the big bull run happened, and Crypto Traders Pro all kind of came out of the woodwork, and we made that happen too.
Okay. What was the first thing that kind of drew you to Bitcoin? Like, what was the allure, and why did you get into it? And I'm curious because everybody has kind of a different story. And early on, I mean, a lot of people bought it just for the tech, right? Some people bought
Sure.
it to buy drugs. Some people on Silk Road or whatever. Some people just did it because they're geeky and they like the technical aspects of it. What drew you to it? I'm just kind of curious. Like, was it the political side? Was it something else?
100% politics and economics.
Okay.
I was that really nerdy libertarian kid in college. Not nerdy in a weirdo sense, but I was I was the head of the debate team, but I was also in a rock band and all that. So I was I was that guy, and I was always talking about sound money. Hey, here's why we should be back on the gold standard and that kind of thing.
Nice.
And super into the Mises Institute. I was a subscriber to the Lou Rockwell report and all that
Okay.
kind of underground anarcho-capitalist kind of stuff. And when I first heard about Bitcoin, I was like, it's digital fiat. That sounds terrible. But then I actually read the white paper, and it's a 15-minute read, 20-minute read, and I was
Sure.
like, all right, let's see if I can break this down. And I sat and tried to poke holes in it, and I couldn't poke holes in it really.
Yeah.
And realized okay, so this is digital gold with all of the value of cash,
Mhm.
and mixing some of what's cool about PayPal or Venmo or whatever. And I was all in. I was like, okay, this really could replace fiat currency. It could be a combination of the gold standard and the digital economy and all of that. And for me, it's all economic liberty. It's that kind of like, well, pure, Ancapistan or what Ayn Rand would put together. It's Galt's Gulch, that kind of thing. Like,
sure.
If we just create this framework, the free market will take care of everything else. And so that's why I was all in.
No, that's awesome though. That's different from a lot of people, I would say, because a lot of people, like I said, get in. Maybe they're traders or whatever it is, more speculators. Sure. You got into it for economic reasons, and I think that really drew me in as well. Like when I first got into Bitcoin, I honestly didn't really know what it was, and I actually ignored it for a while because I ignored it for a few years because I thought it was just this financial kind of instrument, and I didn't really. I am in the tech scene and I do marketing technology, so I'm more techie. I'm not a coder or anything, but it sounded like something in the financial world. But the moment I saw, no, this is not just the financial world. This is actually digitized money that makes economic sense when, as reading the white paper. And it kind of struck me kind of the same way. And so from there on out, I think I got in maybe, about a year and a half ago, approximately. So a little bit later to the game. But I was hooked and I was like, how come I didn't get in this beforehand? I mean, this is amazing. This is incredible. But then to be perfectly honest, after getting into Bitcoin, trying Litecoin, trying BTC, Bitcoin, trying other things, I was actually quite disappointed. And I remember going to my family and friends and saying, look, there's this electronic money. This is insane. This is going to take over the world. But then I started using it and I was like, yes, this is like emailing money. But it's slow. It's very slow. It's very cumbersome. The interfaces, the UIs are very technical. This is not going to work long term. It's just got to be improved. And so it's interesting. You came from an economic, and I'm going to come back to that a little later.
Sure.
But it's important to, I think, realize that why you got into it and what you support now and why you support it, I think is pretty relevant to this. So first, before getting into that, I want to ask you a little bit about your businesses. I know you said you own a printing company. I know you also said you own a platform called Crypto Traders Pro. It's more of a community, a cryptocurrency trading community. Give us a little background about, I guess, both of those businesses, more specifically on the crypto one, but I'm curious about the other one a little bit as well.
Sure. So I'm actually, my family is from the printing industry. My great-grandmother, Chicago's a big printing city, a lot of Germans there, and Germans brought printing to the U.S. and started all the newspapers and stuff like that. Well, my great-grandmother was one of those people. She started the first woman-owned printing company in what is called Printers Row still, but it's just a swanky neighborhood now. But
nice.
Printers Row was just where all the printers set up their businesses. My grandfather worked for her and married her daughter and begat my father, who also owned a printing company. And then I was kind of born in the industry, and I've just basically stayed in it. I've got a lot of very old connections. I'm pretty good at getting printing done in Chicagoland.
Awesome.
Moving into crypto, basically in 2017, I joined a Facebook group that was just called Crypto Traders.
Okay.
It was like not the most creative name in the universe, but I joined and I was like, oh, this is actually like a really well moderated group because most of it is like, When Moon or you get somebody from Eastern Europe trying to get you to jump into their scam or whatever. And, excuse me. But this place was really healthy, so I started just having fundamental-based conversations. I was answering people's questions about like how mining works and stuff like that. And the admin, the guy that founded the group, was like, "Hey, I could use moderators. Do you want to be a moderator?" And I agreed. And then within about 2 months, he's like, "Hey, I'm actually putting together a training course to teach people technical analysis. Like, do you want to be our fundamental analyst? You obviously know what you're talking about." And we became friends pretty quickly through Facebook. And then it was like, you know what, actually, maybe this isn't just about selling like a video course. Like maybe let's put together like a think tank and kind of try to be like a central information repository, and we'll bring in newcomers and educate them on how to get into the like general blockchain entrepreneurship. And focus on trading because I think it's a relevant skill regardless of what part of the industry you're in. But then it's turned into like we've got professional traders, we got people that run big mining operations, and they all join our private community. There's about 250 people right now that pay. And we all just get to be there and talk about ways to make money and integrate businesses, and we're just trying to change the world one step at a time, basically.
That's awesome. How big is the overall community? I know you said that there's a certain group that pays, but how big is the overall community?
Across all social media, we got about 75,000 people. Wow. So that's Facebook, YouTube, Twitter primarily.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, super active community. We have a very moderated Facebook group. Mm-hmm. So literally no scams. We do daily discussion posts. And if people ask something relevant, like we'll push that through to be discussed on the Facebook group. But we are the only spam-free, scam-free group on Facebook.
Yeah.
And then everything else, like Twitter is it's advocacy, or me explaining, mining economics, that kind of stuff to people. And we just try to provide value. And I believe that long term, just being the honest guy in the space is good for me as much as it's good for everybody else. So that's what we do.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I've looked at your website. I've looked at the business a little bit. Definitely very interesting, very intriguing. I would love to, not necessarily right this moment, but at a later point in time, like I mentioned earlier, I would love to bring you back and just kind of go through the community and show people what's there, because I think even myself could benefit from it. I belong to different groups. I've been trading. I'm not a professional trader, but I've been trading for off and on for about a year approximately, right? So I'm learning more, learning about indicators, learning all that stuff. Obviously, you can see some of my videos. I've been doing some trades on the videos.
For sure.
So I'd love to just pick your brain about that. Have you always been in trading, like since you can remember, or like when did you get into trading, just in general?
I actually, so 2014. I was buying Bitcoins to use Bitcoin. I was using it and trying to get people to accept it. Hey, go to hot dog stand and say, hey, can I pay you in Bitcoin, and then have that conversation. But then in 2014, I'd been buying Bitcoin in like the $100 to $300 range for 2 years, and then in 2014 it started to explode up.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, now we're looking at, some of the stuff I bought has gone up 10 times in value.
Yeah.
What the heck do I do with it? So I started to just do, your basic Google foo and watch some YouTube videos and like, you know what, I'm going to sell half of what I got at like $1,000 because that's just good to lock that in. I did that, and then the price crashed.
Yep.
so I got like really lucky on my first like attempt to make profits, and and then from there I was just like, okay, I guess I'll just go back to accumulating, and I did that really until like 2015, 2016.
Yep.
And then you could start to see the kind of bull run start to charge back up, and I had been trading just a little bit, but I don't know that I was great at it. But I'm conservative. Like, just reading the chart, it's like, okay, well, my gains are this amount, and we're nearing all-time highs again. I'll just sell again, and it's just kind of how I've always traded. In fact, even now that I'm like full-time in trading, it's still the way I trade. I make 3 to 5 trades a month.
Yeah.
So I'm, it's not an all-consuming thing. I chart every day.
Yeah.
But I usually look at it and say, well, I guess I'll buy a little more, or I guess I'll short a little more, or whatever, and until I get the move that I want to get, and then I close it and go about my day, make YouTube videos or whatever else.
No, it's funny you mentioned that. So when I first got into trading, as probably many people, like I made a ton of mistakes. I lost money.
Sure.
I traded when I shouldn't. I traded too often, trading all the time, trying to be like that day trader. Like, oh, can I trade in the next 5 minutes? Can I trade the next, And I learned very quickly that doesn't work. And so I've kind of scaled back myself, right, to the couple times a month. And I do it a little more than that just for learning purposes, but I do small amounts of money. And it helps me learn quite a bit. But you're not the first professional trader that has told me that has kind of helped me understand like it's not about trading all the time. It's not about trading often. It's about trading smart at the right times, right? When other people may not know when those times are. And so I'm learning that, and I'd love to pick your brain a little more about trading in the future again.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Now, I mean, moving forward a little bit, I do want to get into the current market conditions. I want to get into Bitcoin BTC, Bitcoin Cash ABC versus Bitcoin SV. First, though, I want to start kind of with this Operation Dragon Slayer because I think it'll kickstart the conversation in a good way. Do you want to kind of frame up or recap what Operation Dragon Slayer is and what you think is going to happen in general with that, right? With that theory. Go ahead and explain the theory first.
Okay, so this requires us to do a little rewind back to what the scaling debate is. So in about 2015, the Bitcoin Core developers they canned Gavin Andresen, who was the guy who was given the keys to the kingdom by Satoshi Nakamoto. Satoshi said, Gavin, I like you. You get Bitcoin. You're in charge. Well, not too long after that, like I guess it was 4 or 5 years, but Gavin came out and said he believes that Craig Wright, or he had been proven that Craig Wright had proven to him that Craig was Satoshi Nakamoto.
Yep.
Well, all of a sudden, the next day, the other developers revoked his keys and locked him out of the GitHub. So it was like a pretty nasty way to get fired from an open source project. But
was it literally the next day? Was it literally?
It was with, well, I mean, they're kind of around the world. It was within a couple of days.
That's crazy. Yeah.
For sure, yeah.
That speaks for itself too, but.
Indeed, yeah. So, this guy, Craig Wright, comes out of the woodwork in like 2014, 2015 and claims he's Satoshi Nakamoto because he's being sued by Ari Kleiman, who's the brother of the other guy who I think is also Satoshi Nakamoto, Dave Kleiman. But again, that we could go into this stuff for hours. But so Gavin Andresen gets canned. Then the new key holder is a guy named Vladimir van der Laan. Okay. I believe he's a Dutch programmer and a couple other guys. But everybody is paid by a company that just got founded called Blockstream Corporation. Blockstream shows up and starts pushing this narrative that Bitcoin can't scale, blockchains don't work. Well, not that they don't work, but that they don't work as cash for the whole world. Mm-hmm. Like you were saying, Bitcoin's a little bit slow. It's not great. It's not doing what we want it to. Well, this narrative kind of permeated the Bitcoin space starting in about 2014 or 2015. And anybody who disagreed with it started getting cut to pieces. Like you're banned from the subreddit, you're banned from our developer Slack channels, and blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
So then you get to this point where miners are stuck in a position where it's most profitable for them to mine BTC, but they don't like the roadmap because ultimately for them, they're long-term thinkers. And if blocks stay at 1 megabyte, they can only get so many block fees per every 10 minutes.
Right.
But that subsidy gets cut every 4 years, roughly. So every time the subsidy cuts, they have to have either raised the price of Bitcoin by double, which has worked thus far, or they need to expand the capacity of blocks so that fees, A, don't deter use, and B, are enough for them to sustain their business profitably. Well, Blockstream, the Bitcoin core narrative was like, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to change the network economics to moving things off chain. We're going to develop this Lightning Network thing. And miners don't want that. They want big blocks and they want a lot of transactions because they want to earn fees, period.
Yeah.
Well, there's all these burned developers, all the guys that were friends of Gavin Andresen, the other people that were developing there. This is Jeff Garzik, Mike Hearn, a lot of these people who were like the Bitcoin developers of about 5 years ago now. So coming into 2017, there was the New York and Hong Kong agreements where developers met with miners to say, okay, here's what we want to do. We want to have 2 megabyte Bitcoin blocks as part of our scaling plan, and the developers wanted SegWit, and SegWit allows the connection of Lightning Network. So they agreed. That was the direction everybody was going to go. And then all of a sudden there started this kind of PR campaign on Twitter that, no, we're not going to go SegWit 2x because that will centralize Bitcoin. And then Bitmain via BTC and the people that became Bitcoin ABC forked and created Bitcoin Cash.
Yep.
So this was 2017. Then there was this discussion. Who's the real Bitcoin?
Yep.
Okay. Well, when it comes down to who's the real Bitcoin, it really depends who you ask. And this is a religious conversation more than anything because it's about your interpretation of the white paper. So if you ask a very liberal Democrat or a very conservative Republican what the role of the Constitution is in the United States, you'll get two very different answers. And it's the same thing with the white paper. If you're a small block maximalist versus a big block maximalist, you'll get very different answers as to what the role of the white paper is.
Yeah.
Well, so then it kind of turned into like, okay, are we going to have a Bitcoin civil war? And we kind of started to, except for the big bull run took off. And we started to see Bitcoin go from about $1,000 to $20,000 inside of a 2-month window.
Yep, I remember.
And it made it difficult for Bitcoin Cash to make the case that it was the real Bitcoin because it got beaten up in value really, really badly, really quickly. So what Operation Dragon Slayer is this assumption, and it's kind of a conspiracy theory, but it's circled around the Bitcoin community, which is full of crazy stuff.
Oh yeah.
The concept is that these miners who got strong-armed by social media pressure, mixed with the developers who got strong-armed by Blockstream, mixed with people who have commercial interest in Bitcoin being used as a means of exchange rather than just this store of value narrative, were colluding, and they were going to flip the hash power and have all of the old holders, all the guys who like remembered Bitcoin in its glory days, like they'll all short BTC and use it to buy Bitcoin Cash, and they're gonna flip it. They're gonna murder BTC, and BCH will be the new Bitcoin, and that's the basic premise of Operation Dragon Slayer.
Yeah. So let me go ahead and finish your thought there. I do have so many questions.
So that's the basic premise. That's the 2017. The problem is that it didn't happen.
Okay.
A lot of people said it was. There was like conspiracy theory videos. There was a guy charging $150 an article for like the inside paper. You know, I've got it signed by XYZ Chinese
Sure.
gangster, and then it just didn't happen. So it was like, okay, Operation Dragon Slayer is BS. But I think it got subverted, and it may be potentially playing out in the woodwork now.
Okay, hold that thought because I want to get to that. But I have a lot of questions about what you just said. So first, I've always thought or felt, for many reasons, I guess subtle reasons, that Blockstream, something was wrong with the picture. Blockstream, I came on the scene probably right before Blockstream came on the scene, or maybe at the same time. Sure. And I remember it kind of emerging out of almost nowhere. It just kind of emerged and almost hijacked BTC out of nowhere. And I remember thinking to myself, like, this is very fishy. Like, here we have this, Satoshi Nakamoto white paper, vision for Bitcoin, decentralized money, not letting third parties control your destiny, so forth and so on, be your own bank, blah, 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 blah. And that's, right. We can talk about that later too. But then Blockstream comes out and says, hey, we're this company. We're actually going to determine or decide the direction of BTC based on whatever we want, right? And I'm like, well, wait, how can that happen? That's not supposed to be what Bitcoin is, right? And it just kind of came out of nowhere. And once I understood what they're doing, I was like, well, wait a minute. They're hijacking this. And so I've always thought, like, who are these people? Who is Blockstream? And I've done a little research. I can't say that I've gone way down the rabbit hole, but who are they? I mean, do you know, like, who Blockstream is, where they came from, who funded them, like a little background on that? Do you know?
I do. That's a fun part of the story, actually. So the CEO is a guy named Adam Back. He is a brilliant programmer, actually. He's the only person named in the Bitcoin white paper. Satoshi Nakamoto named Adam Back as the inspiration for proof of work. Adam Back had a product, I believe it was called Hashcash, but I feel like I always screw that up when I recall it.
No, it's familiar. It sounds familiar.
I think it's Hashcash in the white paper, but I could be wrong. So here comes my social media crucifixion if I was wrong. But he's mentioned because Adam Back actually created proof of work, which is significant. He just didn't connect it to anything. And the reason is Adam's a computer scientist. He's not an economist. He's not a businessman, or he wasn't. And so Blockstream, this is a little bit of a rabbit hole thing, but all of this is verifiable. You can look up financial records. So
well, this is what I want, and I want to make sure. Feel free to openly talk, because this is what I want. Because so many people go onto Reddit, onto all these different forums, on Twitter. You don't know what way is up, and so I find it valuable, very valuable, to talk to people like you that have taken the time to actually sift through some of that, right? I mean, it's valuable because I can go sift through it. Anybody can, but it takes time, And so the fact that you've done that, the fact that I know you, the fact that I could take it for truth. I mean, it's valuable to me. So I want to know kind of the ins and outs of what you did see, just to be able to think on it, right? I mean,
so the simple part of it is to just follow the money. Where did Blockstream come from? Who founded it? Who are the corporate partners? Well, the main seed money to found Blockstream Corporation came from an old French corporation called AXA, or AXA. Okay. AXA is an insurance company. They're in old finance. They're an old company based in the EU and run primarily out of France. Okay. And at the time, the CEO of AXA Insurance, who was very much an insider to the financial industry, his name was Henri de Castries. Or I probably butchered that because I'm not French, but
that was pretty good.
Thank you. So If you're from Texas, his name's Henry. But yeah, Henri de Castries, he's a central banking insider, lobbyist. But I did a little bit of research into who Henri de Castries is, and at the time that he pushed to fund and create Blockstream, he was the president of the Bilderberg Group. And
wow,
for anybody that's ever done research on like the nefarious aspects of central banking. Now, there's all kinds of arguments that a central bank provides stability and everything else. However, if you're of the belief that central banks were created as a war profiteering insider structure to control nations, you have inevitably found yourself in a conversation about who Bilderberg is. And what the Bilderberg Group is they are basically the insiders group. Okay. So these are CEOs of Fortune 50 corporations, prime ministers, presidents, and central banking magnates. So they are the most powerful people in the history of the world, and they like to have these little meetings. And the Bilderberg Group is sort of like if you were to have gang members from rival gangs put their weapons down and have a closed-door meeting and decide how are we going to rule the streets for the next year. So Bilderberg, you would literally have, let's say, Mikhail Gorbachev sitting with Henry Kissinger, sitting with the president of the Federal Reserve, so people that are oftentimes at war with each other in public, literally having dinner together and discussing the best ways to make the world work for the next year. Because they're closed door, they are no media welcome at all. It is the source of all kinds of conspiracy. What we do know is that they are basically the couple hundred richest, most powerful people in the entire world having closed-door meetings and deciding what to do. And the president, so this is not, Henri de Castries is not just a member. He was not a guy that was brought in as a guest with a wristband that let him get into one function or the other. He was the president of Bilderberg at the time that he came up with the idea to found Blockstream Corporation. So you have Bitcoin, which, as you were saying, be your own bank, decentralize everything, get people off this fiat standard, bring back human sovereignty through unstoppable peer-to-peer digital cash. And then Blockstream comes out and says, no. Think of it as a settlement layer that can connect to custodial network nodes that do all these different things, and it can be like a settlement layer of the fiat economy, and and hey, we're going to get futures out of CME Group, and Nasdaq's going to be trading it, and blah blah blah. We're all going to be rich as long as you buy Bitcoin and keep the blocks small. Well, I mean, it's a major conflict of interest, and when you bring it up, and I find this more telling than anything is that if you bring this up, you are laughed at by all of the influencers. So the Jimmy Songs or the Tone Vays or Samson Mao is another. I believe he's the chief marketing officer for Blockstream. If you mention that and say, well, how much of Blockstream's money comes from and goes back to AXA Insurance? It's, here comes the conspiracy theorist, and it's like, well,
they don't address it. I mean, if they, exactly, right. And that's why, it's fishy.
It is point and laugh. It is never ever answer the question, and the question is super relevant because it's not just a vain conspiracy theory. Blockstream is a branch of AXA Insurance, and they're connected to central banking interests.
The crazy thing is that's how any political tactic will work. I mean, if you look at how the political world works in general, anytime you bring up some sort of opposition, there are tactics they use to deflect that opposition, right? And that's one of those tactics. And it's really interesting you bring that up because it happens all day long in the political sphere. I mean, you probably know that better than anybody since you've been in that sphere and you've worked in that sphere. But I mean, you could look at any of the debates going on today, and if you bring up the hard facts about any debate on either side, and proving either side wrong, you typically can, or you could typically have a lot more facts in your ammunition, that could legitimately carry the conversation into a productive way, but it doesn't happen because it's not really the end goal, right? And so the end goal here, for Blockstream is not necessarily to create worldwide money. It's something else. There's an ulterior motive, and you kind of articulated that a little bit there. So that's really fascinating. But I think the majority of the world does not know that at all. They have no context of any of that. And so when they're looking at cryptocurrency and blockchain and looking at Bitcoin BTC, they know none of that. One question I have, though, is, which I've never really quite understood, and I'm guessing this is just because it's collusion with the exchanges or whoever else. Who determines the tickers? Because I know it's just tickers, but tickers have a pretty big influence, especially when you have years of social media campaigns and so forth behind it. There's a lot of power in the ticker, in the name. So how do they control the names? Like, do you have any insight on that?
There is actually an international standard for tickers. So BTC is arbitrary. The ticker can be chosen, like, at Kraken, for example, they use the international standard, which is XBT.
Okay.
And that's the legal. So if you get into currency standards for international ticker standards, anything that does not have a nationality, so like gold, for example, is not a country's currency, but so it's XAU. AU is its elemental table of elements is AU. So XAU is the ticker for gold. So because Bitcoin is not issued by a central bank, its ticker is XBT. So it's X Bitcoin.
Okay.
BTC is an arbitrary standard chosen by probably just whoever opened the first exchange and just decided that's what I'm going to call it.
Well, okay. So sorry to interrupt. I want to make sure it's clear. So you have Bitcoin, right? This is Bitcoin, and then it forks into two. And in theory, we're saying that, okay, when Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash split, Bitcoin Cash forked off of Bitcoin.
Correct.
Leaving BTC as the change and leaving BCH, Bitcoin Cash, as the longest chain, right? Yet the ticker changed. And that's the way I look at BSV today, right? It's the longest chain, but it's the second generation ticker, right? And so in the way Craig Wright describes it is it's the longest chain, right? Because it's the original, right? So that means that BTC forked off of Bitcoin. That means BCH forked off of Bitcoin, right? But that's hard to understand for people that don't know all these little nuances, right? I mean, would you agree with that first, I guess?
Well, it's complicated. Here's the thing, is I would argue that the original Bitcoin, in the purest sense, is actually dead. It doesn't exist.
Sure, okay. Fair
enough. BTC, has gone through multiple iterations before BCH split off of it. If you go back to the white paper, and again, this is like a conservative versus liberal view of the white paper conversation, but if you look at how the white paper defines what Bitcoin is, it's the longest unbroken chain of digital signatures back to the original block, comma, that has the longest proof of work.
Okay.
Now, if you analyze BTC has the most proof of work.
Hey, one sec, Kurt.
No problem. So BTC clearly has the most proof of work. It has the most hash power, and it does go all the way back to the Genesis block. However, SegWit removes the signatures from the transactions and puts them in a different part of the block. So the hash that defines what a Bitcoin is different on SegWit transactions. So Bitcoin cachers, big blockers in general, would look at SegWit and say any coin on the SegWit chain is not a Bitcoin, and therefore BTC is at least partially not Bitcoin.
Gotcha.
So, however, Bitcoin Cash only has about 2.5 or 3% of the proof of work that Bitcoin has. So Bitcoin Cash and now Bitcoin SV have an unbroken chain of digital signatures back to the Genesis block, but they don't have the most proof of work. So then it's sort of like half siblings arguing about who's more, like, who deserves the inheritance more.
Right.
And it's like, well, but you have a different mom, but you have a different dad, and it's all just sort of like, well, shoot, the hard fast rule doesn't actually apply to any of them. So now you have to have a little bit more of a nuanced conversation, which is, okay, who is the most like the Bitcoin white paper, which in my opinion is the most important thing if we're defining Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, then you can break out the other elements, like,
Mm-hmm.
just everything else. Well, how are the blocks hashed, and what's the block time, and are we still using SHA-256? And
Yeah.
it's a high level conversation. It's kind of like conversation if you have Catholics and Baptists arguing
Sure.
with each other
Sure.
about how are we supposed to sing, and it's like I don't know, does that matter? And like, well, yeah, to some people it really really matters.
Sure.
But if you're an outsider, it's like you guys are pretty wacky.
No, that makes actually a lot more sense, and I actually didn't know that distinction between the proof of work and the longest chain, like you just described. So that's good to know. So let's kind of fast forward a little bit to now, right? So we had the splitting of Bitcoin Cash, right, from BTC, from the original Bitcoin, if you will. Now we have Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, or BSV, and we have Bitcoin Cash ABC, which essentially split into two. So you said Operation Dragon Slayer, the flippening, if you will, of BTC to BCH didn't happen, fell apart, broke, didn't work for whatever reason. You're saying now it potentially could be revived or kind of relive or be executed through something else. And I'm assuming you're talking about Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, Bitcoin SV, BSV. So keep going with the theory and kind of with what you think is going to happen or how you see it.
So some more background. So when we go back to about a year ago, Bitmain was autonomous. Jihan Wu, biggest miner, the most successful company in the history of Bitcoin.
Yep.
Multi-billions. I mean, they were on a tear. However, Bitcoin Cash did not work out the way that they assumed it would, and Jihan Wu rode down a big pile of Bitcoin Cash down to essentially nothing, given that he was holding millions of them. He was selling BTC to pay his bills, but then accumulating more and more Bitcoin Cash, believing in the Bitcoin Cash vision. And then it seems like during this hash war, or during this interim, so all of 2018 and a little bit into 2017, but primarily let's just say 2018, the Bitcoin Cash community was actually two communities. I have come to really figure out with a backward look at it. Part of the community was like, no, Bitcoin Cash is Bitcoin. We're the real Bitcoin, and we're going to take over. We're going to be the main chain. And it's funny because the warning signs were there that wasn't actually the thought of the whole community, especially some of the people that were in big positions. Jihan Wu, for example, very publicly said, no, Bitcoin is Bitcoin, and Bitcoin Cash is Bitcoin Cash.
Yeah, I remember, yeah.
And, and I remember reading that and being like, that's, I would have been nice to have him as a political ally, but, whatever. And then we had the same thing with Amaury Sachet, who is the lead developer of Bitcoin ABC, saying the same thing, like, no, Bitcoin Cash is Bitcoin Cash. In some ways he was saying, I'm Bitcoin Cash, actually. Like, I forked it. It was my code, blah, blah, blah. And then he started talking about, like, let's get away from using Merkle trees and let's switch to a Merklix tree, which is complicated techie jargon.
Sure.
And but then, like, let's have a pre-consensus model, and let's rather than letting transactions come in organically the way the white paper says they should, let's order them in a certain way that makes them more effective. So he started to really push this kind of altcoin narrative, to which I always say, like, okay, if you don't want to be Bitcoin, then move to a community like Dash or Digibyte that's been developing this for 5 years. They agreed 5 years ago that Bitcoin wasn't Bitcoin, and they were going to do something completely different. So let's do fast blocks and everything else, and master nodes, and that's all great. I like the Dash and Digibyte communities just fine, but they're not Bitcoin.
Sure.
And Amaury Sachet seemed to want to go that direction, and the half of the community that was like, no, we thought Bitcoin Cash was Bitcoin, ended up breaking down and splitting the community and becoming Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, which is to say, we believe Satoshi was right in 2009 when the white paper came out.
So real quick, why do you think Amaury Sachet went down that path? Because for the longest time, it seemed like he was a supporter of the vision, right? Of kind of the white paper vision. And maybe you could disprove that, but why do you think he went down that path? Or what happened there, you think?
I think,
I
don't want to,
but yeah.
It is speculative. I don't know Amaury personally.
Sure.
He seemed like a nice guy. He was one who 9 months ago I would have trusted to speak authoritatively on what is Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash, but it seems like the first thing that I saw was in August. He put out an article about the need for pre-consensus, and I didn't like that. I read it and was like, like, I mean, maybe, but I don't, like, we're not there yet. We're not talking about, getting to gigabyte blocks or anything. And, like, let's just continue to work on merchant adoption and all the stuff we've been working on. And it just seemed like his narrative changed, but it might just be because I didn't know him personally and hear where his head was at earlier.
Yeah.
But he seems like, I mean, he's a developer. He wants to put his stamp on things, and he wants to be well-known. He's been heavily criticized by the quote-unquote real Bitcoin community for being the shitcoin fork-off guy. And he just wants to say, like, no, I'm an actually creative, progressive developer, and I'm going to make the greatest coin in the universe, but it unfortunately kind of turns into a Mori coin rather than Bitcoin. And again, that's my opinion on it. I don't necessarily think Amori's a bad guy or that it was anything nefarious at all, but, ego is what ego is, and if he's a legitimately talented developer, why wouldn't he want to create something in his own vision and make it sail? Like, that's fine. It's just not Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. No. I've been curious about him because he seemed to kind of flip to me. He seemed like he flipped somewhat quickly. Yeah. I don't know enough about him. I haven't done enough research about him, but it just kind of seemed like that on the surface. But okay. So where do you think things are going to go now? Because now we have we have Bitcoin ABC, we have Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, we have BTC, all kind of vying for this world currency. Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, BSV, says, look, we're going to kill all altcoins. We're going to destroy all the altcoins. There's going to be one cryptocurrency. There's going to be one main blockchain. It's going to be BSV. All others will die, whether naturally or through a 51% attack or through whatever means they're going to die. I have had a challenge kind of grappling with that, but I feel like I've somewhat come to terms with it, and I feel like it makes a lot of sense that we would have one versus many. Originally, I didn't feel that way because I thought about it differently. And I'm curious from your take, like, how do you look at that? Like, why does there need to be one coin versus multiple? Where do you think Bitcoin Satoshi Vision is going? What do you think about Craig Wright, too? And I want to get into that a little bit, too. That's a whole other conversation, maybe. But
so, that's another 2-hour conversation. Craig, and I think it actually kind of has to start with Craig.
Yeah, sure.
So he has claimed to be Satoshi Nakamoto, not as an individual, but he claims to have been a significant member of the team, and I personally believe he's the last surviving member of the team. But he's enigmatic. He's not super nice if you disagree with him. He's very happy to call someone a soy boy or a cuck or a loser or an idiot the second he feels like you don't have value, and that obviously rubs people the wrong way. And I actually think that's the primary motivator for guys like Amori, just being like, you know what, let's just go a different direction because this guy is toxic. And again, that may be a fair argument too. But if you break it out to like why maximalism, right? Like, why do we need one chain? I think the real question to ask is, why do we need 2,000 chains?
Totally.
I certainly don't want there to be a karate coin for me to own. Like, this is for spending on karate class, and it's like, okay, that's absurd.
Yep.
I don't know that one chain to rule them all is necessarily the greatest thing in the universe, but I think something like 3 to 5 might make more sense. Certainly more sense than 2,000. But all of these different use cases can end up being side chains of the main chain.
Right.
So if you have the cash use case, like, rewinding a little bit, the Bitcoin white paper assumes one blockchain. And that's just the base assumption of the white paper, is that all hash power will secure this chain, and then this chain will be cashed to the world, and it'll be unstoppable. It will be an unstoppable economic force. And so that's the assumption of the architecture of the thing. That doesn't mean that there can't be 50 or 10,000 or 50 million various side chains that do different things, but they should connect to that main chain, because the giant pile of hash power that exists there is a security feature, and we
Right.
need that security feature to stop from, the U.S. government opening a big ass mining operation and
Yeah.
killing the chain. Like, they can absolutely do that, especially at these levels. There's only a few $1 billion worth of value there,
Yeah.
and the U.S. government can come up with $1 trillion if it has to.
Yep.
It's as long as it takes to put the digits on screen.
Yep.
So, that's a security feature. We need way more hash power and way more use for all of it to make sense. And the problem with BTC is that BTC, the way it is built right now, cannot scale.
Yep.
And so it has this limitation. The biggest block in Bitcoin was 400 transactions. The biggest day ever in BTC was 400,000 transactions.
Mm-hmm.
And what were the fees? They were $50 a transaction.
I remember when they went up, it was ridiculous. I was like, why would anybody want to do this?
Right. It was terrible.
Yeah.
And, people say, it's because people were spamming the network or whatever. And it's like, no, they were paying for transactions on the network. That is the nature of the economic model of the network itself. So no, that is not spam. That is not invalid if it's paid for. Now, on the flip side, you have BSV, who the biggest block it ever did, remember BTC 400, BSV, 400,000 transactions in a single block, which means about 2,500 transactions a second, which is exponential to BTC's peak of about 7.
Yep.
And I don't even know the math, but when you talk about how many that could be per day, if they could continue blocks at 100 megabytes, which is not actually doable right now, but it's being worked on actively, you're looking at something that can start to become a real tool for international commerce. So I think when we start to get this next bull run coming, you're going to start to see these fees go up in BTC again, because there's just no way that it doesn't.
Yep.
And then people will say, like, okay, well, what do I do? Well, the last time they went to Ethereum, and then Ethereum was having $3 to $5 transaction costs and transactions lost in their mempool and all of that too. So we've got all these coins that are these kind of king coins up there that don't actually have the ability to function to do anything they promised.
Yep.
Well, the only 2 projects legitimately that are trying are Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin SV. They have different roadmaps, but those 2 groups are both trying to develop a coin that can work for the 4 billion people on Earth that have internet access, and allow them to do 50 transactions a day a person, like conduct real business on the blockchain.
Yeah.
And so, I like to compare it to, if we're on a race to Mars, BTC has got about a 2 or 3 mile head start on Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin SV.
Sure.
And a lot can happen in the other several 100 million miles of the race.
Yeah.
And, people act like that's crazy, but no, it's crazy to enter a race with a rocket that doesn't have the fuel to make the trip.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at today. So.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's fascinating to watch. It's fascinating to see what's going to happen. And I think there will likely be other chains. I think that they won't go away. Like no one's going to be prevented from creating a blockchain. I mean, the code is there. People are going to create it. People are going to create individual blockchains for like myself, right? And you could do all these niche things with them. But I think what a lot of people are failing to understand is that there will be a lot of blockchains, but they will be irrelevant. Like they will exist, they just won't be relevant. Think of something like I kind of think about it like BitTorrent. Like BitTorrent exists, right? The first iteration of BitTorrent was way back in the day, probably before Napster, right? Like peer-to-peer, Usenet kind of things way back in the day was like the first iterations, right? Then Napster came along. What happened to Napster? Got shut down. Then came LimeWire. What happened to LimeWire? They got shut down. And then came Kazaa. Right. All these things iterated to form BitTorrent. BitTorrent exists today. A peer-to-peer network cannot be shut down by any central authority because it's decentralized. Guess how many people in the real world use BitTorrent? It's irrelevant to 90% of people. If I want to use BitTorrent, I could use it. I'm somewhat technically savvy. I could go use it. If I want my brother, my mom, my sister, anybody else to use it, it's irrelevant. And I'm like, no, you could go get all these things from it. And they're like, I can't do it. It's irrelevant to them. And so it's irrelevant to the world. And that's how I feel like what's going to happen to blockchain or these cryptocurrencies is that they will exist. They'll be used for these geeky, nichey, very specific use cases. and it won't matter to 90% of the people.
Yeah,
So, I mean,
I
that's
agree.
kind of how I view it. But I was watching a kind of a debate unfold with Daniel Krawitz and Vin Armani on that
Sure.
exact subject. You maybe saw it, and I was like, how I mean, it seems fairly obvious to me that, like, of course there's not just going to be one chain. I mean, that would
Right.
just seem ludicrous. I mean, the code's there. There's going to be more than one chain. They just
Sure.
won't be relevant, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so okay, so now I'm kind of curious. What do you think? Where are we at in the market? And you mentioned something a little bit ago. You said the bull run that's coming. So for the
Mhm.
last year, people have been talking about the bull run is coming, right?
Right.
And I too feel like it's coming, right? I do feel like we may experience lower lows, and I
Mhm.
don't know that, obviously. I'm not, I can't read a crystal ball. I'm not a professional trader, but it does feel like we're going to see lower lows. What do you think is going to happen in the market? Like, just in general, like in the next 12 months, next 6, 12 months, if you had to project, if you were a betting man, like what direction do you think it's going to go and how do you think it's going to play out?
So, I think we're going to have a really weird year. And, 2018 in January, I recommended to our community short Bitcoin. And it went so far as to have people, like, we received death threats, point blank.
Wow.
And,
Crazy.
yeah, you can't do, you're a traitor, a traitor to Bitcoin. It's like, no, like, sorry, it's massively overbought. Like,
Sure.
this is insane. And, but people don't understand economics. They don't understand liquidity. They don't know how markets work. Shorting Bitcoin was the right thing to do in 2018.
Yeah.
And come February of last year, I very publicly called the bottom at about $3,000.
Okay.
And I've said it a bunch of times. I said it all year. Even when we kept bouncing off of 6K, people kept criticizing me. See, you were wrong. It's only went to 6. I'm like, no, guys, wait for 3. I think 3 is coming.
Yeah.
Well, we saw 3. Well, we saw what 3,100
Yeah.
in November, and from
Same
8 months
difference.
out prediction. Yeah, I'll take the win. but at that point, like that's when I closed like some of my long-term short positions and that kind of thing because it's like, okay, now we don't know. Now
Sure.
we're a little bit in no man's land, and I am not a gambling man, really. Like I take conservative bets based on what I think is rational market behavior. And now, I don't know. I mean, there's an argument to be made for it to hit $1,900, and there's an argument to be made that the bottom is already in.
Well, what do you think? What do you think? So, it's hard because if we believe in BSV or Craig Wright's vision, he publicly came out and said he's going to destroy all these chains, right? Sorry, my lights just went off for a second. He publicly came out and said that he was going to end, right? Ever since then, we've seen a continued decline. Now I don't know if he has that power, but it begs the question, can you believe BSV without believing that, right? And I'm a little torn on that, right? Because I don't know. What do you think? I mean,
and here's here's why I think 2019 is going to be interesting. We saw Ethereum Classic was been 51% attacked. I think for potentially months. I think this has been going on in the background for a long time. We might have a situation where we look at Ethereum Classic and actually audit that damn blockchain and say, oh, somebody doubled the supply on us and we didn't even notice. And I think we're going to start to see stuff like that more and more in 2019 with these minority hash power chains and people that are not, they don't care about the chain. Nobody cares about Ethereum Classic, despite the couple of fanboys and the couple of guys that develop smart contracts for it. It's not
irrelevant.
Used.
Exactly.
It's empty block after empty block. Like, hey, that block had a transaction in it, and like, that's not the revolution. That's not business. That's all a waste, and that's something that's stealing Nexus from what should be the real economy.
Yeah.
And we've got guys like Ari from Shark Pool putting together like, hey, we're going to start just picking off shit coins and double spending them to death so that value can make its way back into the real Bitcoin, which, is debatable. But we're going to see more and more of that because there's so much irrelevant crap in the crypto universe. And then as we start to come that direction, it's important to pay attention to what are the long-term infrastructural investors doing. Now, this is not the NASDAQs and, everybody's, Tim Draper is going to do XYZ with Bitcoin, or now the news the other day was the Russian government's going to buy $10 billion worth of Bitcoin.
Yeah, what do you think of that? You think that's just pure BS, or?
I think it's crap. I think if Russia is in the headline, it's not. No.
Sorry, say it again.
If this is like, is it Goodwin's law? Like if somebody mentions Hitler on the internet, like the argument's over.
I think so.
Like, yeah. And now that's Russia. Like if anybody says Russia, I'm all out.
Yeah.
Here's the chips. I'm leaving the table.
I made a video the other day, and it wasn't like this is going to happen. It was more of like, look at the news I'm seeing. And it was about Russia, and it was about the French making a run on the banks with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, though, is those news articles were only on cryptocurrency-related news outlets. And I specifically went and looked on the video to look at other outlets, and they're not there. So obviously, Anyway, go ahead. I digress.
Here's another little piece of information talking about crypto news. Follow the money on crypto news websites, and you start to see some of the same people who pay for Blockstream. But you want to go down that rabbit hole.
Interesting. At one point, so I come from a marketing background, and so I use different marketing technologies to gather data, right, and insights and whatnot. And a while back, I was looking at like marketing and like advertising and traffic data around all these different coins and their websites and the advertising sites. And I almost put a piece together. I maybe should go back to it, but it was crazy to see like the money and the traffic. It's flowing through very specific hubs and only a few. Yeah. And like you could trace it, and it's pretty wild to watch. And haven't had enough time to like put like some logic in it to actually like formalize something, but it was just eye-opening. Like when you first see it, you're like, wow, it's like 95% of this is going through this company, and so they control the narrative for 90% of the news. That what I mean. So that's 100%. Another maybe conversation again.
It's all propaganda, and I think the thing is like a lot of people understand that about the real world too. I mean, all of mainstream news comes from AP and Reuters.
Yep.
And that's reality, and we just accept it. ABC and NBC and CBS are competing with each other. Like, no, they're not. They're competing for marketing dollars, but they're all at the Bilderberg group. So
they're competing for marketing dollars. It's interesting though. They are competing, but it's a different way people think. Yeah.
Absolutely. So heading back, I don't even remember what the base question was here.
I think it was where the market was going to go. We were talking about the bottom being, and actually, while you're talking about it, I'd like to throw in BSV, right? The price yesterday literally just dropped from like 88, something like that, to around, I think it's gone down to like 71.50, something around there.
Something like that, yeah.
And we're still low now, so we could either see another drop or we could see a bounce. So anyway, the market in general, like in the bottom, like how do you think that's going to play out?
So I think we're going to have a sideways year. As far as markets go, I think it's going to be a lot of sideways action. I think it's going to be a lot of like kind of uninteresting, whatever. BTC still is like 85% of the market, so BTC's action still is going to dictate what the market does. Most altcoins are traded in BTC, so if BTC starts to drop, you start just, panic sells. Most of the market is still retail buyers. There's no liquidity.
Yep.
And, the markets move with Bitcoin, but it's because nobody's using it for anything but speculation.
Yeah.
And so here's the thing. The BSV community, what makes them different is that internally, like when I talk to these people, they're like, ooh, God, we don't want to be listed on Coinbase.
Yeah.
And, it's like, like, well, why? And then the response is that, because that's just what speculators are doing with it. We want miners to mine BSV coins and sell them directly to businesses to be used in a business purpose. Mm-hmm. And that's a completely different model. That's a paradigm shift.
Yep.
And we're not there yet, but it's a business mindset that's very different than this kind of casino mentality where, maybe even 99% of people investing in cryptocurrency are only thinking about fiat value. They're only thinking about how to extract U.S. dollar profits. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so how do we get away from that? And we get away from that by creating, like using cryptocurrency, first of all, as a means of exchange.
Yep.
Go buy a hot dog. Or by using it as the plumbing to kind of run other complex things, logistics management or some of these other, like these things that were ICOs last year.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we're gonna track power, and you can sell your excess power to your neighbor using blockchain and blah blah blah. But doesn't work on Ethereum because Ethereum doesn't really work. And, BSV can kind of be that backbone to some of that stuff. So, as a long-term investor, first of all, I think it's wise to hold the three major versions of Bitcoin. So if you have one BTC, hold one BCH, one BSV. Let that be, your savings, something like that. Otherwise, trade. You can trade for profit. There's nothing wrong with trading for profit. There's good money to be made trading for profit. But we need entrepreneurs to come into the space in a big way because there's no other asset in the history of the world that is used primarily for trading.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing this for the first time in this generation. Like, oh, yeah, you just trade it. You just buy it and sell it for a Lambo in 3 years.
Yeah.
It's like, but why? Where did that value come from?
What is this invisible money? What's these intangible coins?
And it's like, it's a pyramid scheme model, the way that it works today.
Sure.
And that's a big problem because conceptually it's not, but functionally it is. And we need to start to use these things as business tools. And that's really... that's the other that's why I'm personally accumulating BSV.
Yeah.
I have BTC, full disclosure. I believe that if you are brand new to the market, you should have one BTC and one BCH and one BSV as a baseline because that's, I don't know everything. Maybe I'm wrong about literally everything, and that would be your base exposure that I would recommend to people.
Yeah.
But in a non-recommended way because I'm not a financial advisor. But but ultimately, I'm personally accumulating BSV because I think it has more utility than anything else in crypto. It can be cash for the world. It can be the thing that actually legitimately kills Ethereum. It can be the thing. It can replace Ripple. It can have this relationship with big businesses and banks. It can be a worldwide remittance tool. It can be a settlement layer. It can be all these things, and it's the only coin. There's an argument to be made for BCH, but I'm a BSVer, so I'm going to stick to that, and say that it's the only coin that can be all things, and then you can tokenize every other coin to whatever chain that is. So if you love Monero or Zcash or Zcoin or any of these other coins that do different things, cool, connect it to the main blockchain, and it's more secure that way. And you've got ZK Snarks or whatever else you want on the main chain.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. I mean, I couldn't agree more. One thing so I come from working with or for a variety of Fortune, let's say 100 companies. And it always strikes me like we've had conversations, right, about blockchain, about Hyperledger, about these things internally, and actually explored using them like legitimately for an enterprise business use cases, right? And it kind of falls apart. And what I'm wondering is, how do you think, and maybe this is kind of I don't even know if this is a good question to ask, but how come BSV and some of these others, they're not into getting, it doesn't seem like they're making much traction with these bigger players. I mean, in some senses, like IOTA, they've made some traction with like a Volkswagen and some of these other players. But they haven't made much traction with these big companies that have billions of dollars. And that concerns me. And maybe it's early on, right? Maybe it's just too early in the and that's very, very likely, right? Because enterprises usually want something more buttoned up, and
Right.
But how do you think that bridge will be? I mean, how do you think that gap will be bridged? Because it needs to for adoption. I feel like in the long run,
it does.
Those are the people that are going to really enable mass adoption. It's the media and it's the big tech companies or the government. That's how it's going to happen.
I mean, it's a few different things. I think the biggest problem is that almost no blockchains are run by business people. They're run by computer nerds. They're, Vitalik Buterin's a great example. Vitalik's this genius, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, he's a 24-year-old computer programmer with no social skills and no business savvy. And sure, he designed a really crazy boondoggle machine. And it's cool, but cool, so is a whole bunch of other worthless crap that I do with my life. And, so I think Ethereum's a massively overvalued boondoggle that if there was a good businessman in charge of that would be Vitalik's boss and say, listen, here's what this actually needs to do in order to be bootstrapped into being a logistics tool that can be used by FedEx, and And somebody like, a computer programmer looks at that and says, oh, that's, you frivolous, profit motivated people. And that's a big, 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 big problem. And
yeah, yes.
So I think the other issue is that, quite simply, we are just early.
Yeah.
And I think that's exemplified by the fact that there aren't really business people running these blockchains. But if you look at, the internet, I mean, the internet's existed since the 60s.
Yeah.
So it took until the 90s before it even had, like, the bubble. Like, it wasn't even actually used in business. It was most of its valuation was bubble valuation. And the internet didn't really even become, like, the business tool until well into the 2000s.
Yep.
And, now, I mean, it's 2019. So why wouldn't you do everything on the internet?
Yep.
But it was just 15 years ago where it was like, hey, I think we're going to get a website. I mean, it was totally legit in 2003 and 4 to just be like, we just have a phone book ad. Like, that's just who we are. And, but that was a long journey. And you have to look at what made that work. And what made it work was, like, really junky solutions like AOL. And,
MySpace.
We look at MySpace. Hey, we look at these things, we're like, God, that was stupid. But holy cow, man, in 1996, when I was that kid on AOL, like, that was like, nobody understands how cool this is.
I have to ask you, do you remember, so when I got into the internet, I was middle school, and it was dial-up modems, and it wasn't even the internet, like, Prodigy didn't exist. AOL didn't exist. It was bulletin boards. And you would literally dial up to a single server to get to that website. And it was text-based. Like, do you remember that? Do you remember that kind of stuff?
So I was a Mac nerd as a kid, and there was a time, God, I don't remember when, because I was probably in middle school, and there was a kind of a chat room world that I think they called it E-World. And
E-World.
I
was on a Mac. That's probably why. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. It only existed for like what felt like maybe 2 or 3 years, but it was kind of like AOL chat rooms. Okay. Like, you could go and be like, I'm gonna, jump into Pokemon card collectors chat room or whatever, and which was not me, but but eWorld
wasn't me at all.
Right. Never mind.
Never happened.
But eWorld was basically that, and it was the first one that had a graphical user interface, so you could kind of navigate your way into I'm gonna walk into this chat room in this little coffee house or whatever, and it was so stupid. But
it's funny though, because I remember when I was using the bulletin boards, there weren't even graphics. That's how primitive, and the graphics were built. They were literally built from text. And so they were spanned out text messages that could be stitched together. This was way back, like Temple of Screaming Electrons, Digital Cesspool, White Wolf. And this was way back in the day. I used it learn how to make a potato gun or I don't know. There were different documents to make things, right? And Craig Wright called out the other day. He said we're right now at about internet circa 1994, I believe, and it kind of feels like that. And it's really cool to think. Wow. In 1994 to 2019, crazy things have happened with the internet, right? Sure. The next 20 years and everybody is starting to say that blockchain is going to dwarf the internet, right? It's a much more impactful invention. It's wild to think what's coming. I mean, it really is.
Well, and, Craig is going so far as talking about the internet becoming a side chain of Bitcoin SV. So if you want to get real crazy, MetaNet, using IPv6 as a connecting layer to and again, this stuff is I think is basically over everybody's head. But,
sure.
He wants to connect mining nodes and incentivize mining nodes to feed the internet to everybody else. You can get rid of the centralized ISPs and all the ad onboards, off ramps, and all of that, and just replace it with Bitcoin. Yeah. And that's the kind of thing that man, I hope you're holding some BSV if that thing ends up being
blows your mind. It reminds me of imagine it. Well, but even beyond that, if you could buy the protocol itself, and then get a share of that protocol itself. Think of Amazon is built on that. Everything, the internet, the entire internet is built on TCP/IP, right? So imagine in the future if the internet is built on BSV. It's a similar analogy, but maybe not a perfect 100% accurate one. But So anyway, I mean, okay, keep going. I can talk to you forever. We're at about an hour and 20 minutes, so just time check there for us.
Sure. Yeah, we're good. So I think when you look at that, so I mean, zooming back out to like 2019, what the hell do you do, right? Well,
Sure.
I think it depends. If you're a full-time trader, you need to think about purchasing power, fiat value. You need to be growing that. And that's actually the situation I'm in. I have bills to pay, so I need to trade and make money that way. But long term, I'm accumulating things like BSV, but I'm not exclusively going that direction because again, I could be wrong. They could all be liars. It could all be BS, and that's totally possible. So you have to also hedge yourself and protect yourself against things like that. But when I look at all these other blockchain projects, I mentioned before, like Dash and Digibyte, I think they're really smart projects. There's good people developing them. They want to be different. They're trying to come up with a progressive way to replace Bitcoin or to work next to Bitcoin or whatever. But they're trying different things. So yeah, sure. Have a little bit of Digibyte. Have a little bit of Dash. I mean, that kind of stuff could explode too. I don't like XRP. I don't like Ethereum. I think Stellar Lumens is a lot of broken promises waiting to happen.
Okay.
EOS is about a $5 billion broken promise.
Yeah, that's a wild story.
Yeah, and you look at these things and it's like, yeah, some of these are good ideas, but again, it's all computer scientists, and I think ultimately there's no reason for anything to be redundant. And this is like an economic principle, right? You look at, do we need 1,000 car companies? No, we really don't. We're really pretty okay with the big 3 in the U.S. and then another 5 around the planet.
Sure.
And it's because there's finite resources. There's only a certain amount of engineers and everybody else that can come together and make this all work. And I think it's just going to become that. And the funny thing is that, these weren't there used to be 100 car companies in the U.S. back when it was like the Wild West. Buick was a separate company, and so was Pontiac and American Motors and Jeep and all these companies consolidate and say, okay, we should just be working together because if we pool resources and pool talent and then pool the business savvy of whoever's at the top that can make all that work. I mean, that's better for everybody. You get cheaper, higher quality cars that can get into more people's hands, and
it's kind of a natural progression. I mean, it's a natural progression of capitalism in many ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is, and and then it's the profit motive that keeps it. That it doesn't matter. You've got this, well, it's an oligopoly, and it's yeah, but I mean, you can ride a bike or buy a horse if you want to. That's nobody's forcing you. It's just the best option.
Sure.
So if you got to drive 20 miles to work, go buy a Chevy or don't, and that's your situation. And I think that's okay. The Bitcoin economy doesn't have to be based around BTC. It's protocol. It's code. The market doesn't care about, idiot market cares about the ticker, but ultimately its utility is not based on that. It's not based on a popularity contest. It's based on, again, how do I get to work? If the Chevy's the thing that works the best, that's what I'm going to buy. And it's the same thing. If BSV just does my business function better than something else, if I'm the businessman, I'm not going to, well, let's look and see who, I don't know if I like that Craig Wright guy. And it's that's not a conversation that anybody's going to have.
Yeah. Nobody's going to care. Nobody's going to care.
Who's the CEO of Ford or the CEO of General Motors?
Right.
I mean, you don't know. You don't know unless you're into that kind of thing, right? And it's because that's not the part that matters.
Yep.
And, so I think 2019, back to that, will be a year of accumulation. I actually hope it's a year of a lot of junky coins, redundant coins getting killed.
Yeah.
And then I think we really could see bull runs start to heat up maybe the end of 2019
towards the end
or maybe going into 2020. But ultimately, it's got to be based on use. And if it's not based on use, 2020 is going to be slaughter because all of the Bitcoin versions are going to have their next block halving. And if they don't at least, if Bitcoin, BTC, does not at least double its value by the time that happens, then, I mean, it's going to be a big problem. And the incentive to mine goes way down.
What happens if that happens? I mean, in your mind, I haven't thought about that a whole lot, but what would happen? I mean,
so there's a balance. I mean, Bitcoin is designed to work under adversarial
sure.
circumstances. So if, let's say, half the miners of BTC just go away today, well, the mining difficulty drops so that the existing miners, the ones that still stay, they become profitable again.
Right.
And that's okay. So that's how it's supposed to work. However, that is bad because that makes it X amount less secure. And that's the real problem, is that if Bitcoin is holding a certain amount of value, but the security is lower than the value. I mean, this is why something like Ethereum Classic got double spent, is because it was holding too much value and it didn't have the security. It's like, having a $100,000 car in a garage that doesn't have a lock, well, it's in the garage and well, but it's still not secure. So that's kind of the situation where, give me one sec.
Yeah, no worries.
So if Bitcoin loses hash power because it's not profitable, it becomes less secure. It's more likely to be attacked by not just nefarious parties, but banks, governments, that kind of thing too. And then you got a bigger problem on your hands. So we need adoption, and we need it bad. And Lightning Network, I don't know what I'm choking on.
No, it's okay. Go ahead and take a drink if you need.
Lightning Network is a disincentive to mine. It takes things off chain.
Yep.
It brings value of the blockchain down. And if that continues to happen, it becomes less and less secure and more likely to get attacked. And this is why I'm not bullish long term. I don't like the network economics of BTC. I don't think that it works. And I could be wrong. It could be an irrational market. I think fiat currencies are rational in and of itself, but it's the big winner right now anyways.
Yeah.
And
the only thing, it's centralized, but at this point, I think they maybe could still. In the future, maybe not, right? And so it'll be interesting to see how that all kind of plays out, with the powerful folks kind of behind the monetary system.
Well, people want to talk about decentralization with Bitcoin, and it's like, well, there's 5 people with GitHub commit keys.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there you go. That's a very good point. I mean, that's yeah. Why is that never talked about? That's like you said that in like 3 seconds, and that's nowhere anywhere on Twitter, right? I mean, it's crazy to think about that.
And that's the situation. And then, most Bitcoins are held in centralized exchanges, or most of the mining is being done geolocated in China, which is a completely government-run prison plantation, basically. So you got all these actual weak points that are big problems. And and obviously there are criticisms of every other blockchain too that are equally valid. Well, there's only a lot of coins have one guy with commit keys. Geez.
Yeah.
But when you break it down, you've got a lot of big things that people really don't understand about the network economics, and then you have to ask, if Bitcoin really was a threat. So a political point first. I always say, if voting actually worked, it would be illegal. And
fair enough. I've never heard that, but I like it.
and here's the thing: we're given 2 people to choose from in any major election.
Yep.
But those people went through this vetting process full of insiders and lobbyists and all these things for months or years before you ever presented with what feels like a choice.
Yep.
But it's not actually a choice. You're being given a choice between 2 people that are ultimately good for the system.
Yep.
And when I look at Bitcoin, a maximalist will say, yeah, you can't fight Bitcoin because it's decentralized. And I would argue, no, there are centralization points. There are points of control. There are things that if I was a government actor, I know how I would control this thing.
Yeah.
And the fact that it exists the way it exists today tells me that it is controlled, because I think it could be taken down. It could be subverted.
Yeah.
And, social engineering is not that hard.
No.
I mean, just you tell people the way they're supposed to feel, and they just listen. Yeah. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot what we're looking at is people think they're supposed to like BTC. They're supposed to say Bitcoin is decentralized, and they just do. It's NPC culture.
Yep. It's this hype. It's hype, and it is.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Kurt. I think we should wrap it up a little bit. Time's getting long here, but
Sure.
I want to have you back for sure. And I do want to. I have a few more questions, kind of a little bit of a lightning round at the end here.
Sure.
So just kind of want you to say whatever comes to your head. If you feel comfortable with it. If not, just say pass. Just a couple questions. So first, who are three of the top most influential people that you follow on social media in the crypto space? Like who, if you had to call out like 1 to 3 people, who would be the people you would follow? And I'm asking you this because I'm always looking for new information. I'm always looking for new
Sure.
people to follow, good information. Who would those people be? If you have any recommendations.
Wow. Yeah, that's hard, actually. So I do like Craig Wright.
Okay.
I think he's brilliant, and I think the things he says are high value, even when people dislike them.
Yeah.
I think the other guy to follow, keep an eye on, is Ari from
Okay.
Shark Pool,
Okay.
because he's a guy who's really thinking very deeply about blockchain economics and mining. I'd also keep a close eye on Jihan Wu and Roger Ver.
Okay.
I think they're more influential than people give them credit, and whether they're right or wrong, they're market movers.
Yeah.
Man, I don't know. I like.
No, that's great. I mean,
Yeah, I think that's probably a good list. Keep an eye on those guys. If you want to keep an eye on Core, I would keep an eye on Adam Back and Peter Todd also.
Okay.
And Jameson Lopp. So these are block streamers. These are guys who pay attention to what they say. And Samson Mao is another one.
Okay.
All block stream guys, all kind of part of what I feel like is the propaganda machine.
Gotcha.
Keep a close eye on what they say.
Okay. No, fair enough. That's good. I will definitely check those people out. The other question is, are there any books that you recommend or have read? It could be one book, it could be a few books, whatever you think, if any, that you could recommend to others. In the crypto space, if it's not, that's fine too. One of them, for example, I've read Mastering Bitcoin, right? Now I'm starting to kind of question what I'm reading because of some things Craig Wright has recently said and things that he's proving to Andreas that are wrong, right? So do you have any recommendations on any books that you've read, anything like that you could let the viewers know?
It's either How Money Was Made Free or How Money Got Free, something like that. It's a Bitcoin book.
Yeah.
It's about a lot of the early people. It's guys like Eric Voorhees, Brian Armstrong, Roger Ver, kind of how they started their businesses and how their relationships all were back in the day. And really fascinating stuff. It's really good information that kind of shows you, before all these people who are magnates of Bitcoin today, when they were living in apartments and shared spaces and just believed in it. And that's really interesting. Another one I think that is crucial for understanding what's going on is Atlas Shrugged.
Okay. Yes, that's a great book.
Craig Wright, in my opinion, is Henry Reardon.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin is Reardon Metal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you have not read that book, you don't know what you're dealing with.
Yep. No, that's an awesome recommendation. Yeah.
Thank you.
No, I agree. Cool. That will explain a lot of his mentality, a lot of what's just even going on economically, his philosophy. Like it'll explain a lot. I agree.
Yeah.
That's cool. Okay. A few other questions, and then we'll end here. The next one is there anything, like if there was one thing you can purchase using Bitcoin or BSV or whatever crypto it is, what would that be, right? And I ask because I have long wanted to pay bills, other things with crypto. Some things I can, some things I can't. If there was one thing that you would want to pay for, like on a regular basis, or just that would help you in crypto, what would that be? And it could be more than one thing. I'm just curious, like if you have things that you want to pay for that you just can't, that there's no solution for today.
Man, groceries. Here's why. Nerds know how to use Bitcoin. I can buy all kinds of crazy stuff with Bitcoin. But if my grandma was at the cash register tomorrow, and the cashier said cash, credit, check, or Bitcoin, well then my grandma would have to ask me what that means and how to get it and how to use it, and that's I think the most powerful thing. So you can replace groceries with T-shirts at the boutique or pay for haircuts or getting your nails done or whatever else, but the mundane. I want you to buy stuff that you're going to forget about with Bitcoin every week, and That's victory.
That's awesome. That is awesome because I mean, if I could go into the store and buy groceries, I mean, it's things you buy every day. I think that's kind of what you're getting at. It's like think the common things you buy every single day, and I could buy it too, right? I have a BitPay card. I have these different. You could do it different ways, but you're right. I think if you could bring your phone into a Safeway or whatever grocery store of your choice and say I want to buy this candy bar with Bitcoin, and they go, okay, scan right here. That'd be money.
Yep.
That'd be great.
100%.
Okay, and the last question I have, if there's one thing that you want either the crypto community or newcomers that are coming into the crypto community to know, what would that one thing be? Like, and I know that's kind of a hard question because the sky's kind of the limit there, but what's like one takeaway or one thing that you want people to do or know about crypto, like in this space? Does that make sense? Like something, hopefully that makes sense to you.
Yeah. Utility is the thing that creates value.
Okay.
So I always ask everybody, do hammers get more valuable if you put them in a bag and leave them in the closet? And the answer is no. The only circumstance where the answer is yes is if there is a massive hammer shortage and people need to build things.
Yep.
In that case, you'll have wished you had all the hammers, right? And Bitcoin's the exact same way. So buying it and leaving it in cold storage, sitting 10 years doing nothing with it, maybe that's a good idea, but you're waiting for somebody else to create demand.
Yep.
And there's not a lot of that actually going on, unfortunately. So, don't just assume that somebody else needs to do the work that is going to give your Bitcoin value. You can be that entrepreneur. You can be the person that creates a business use or create something that has demand and only accept Bitcoin for it. Write a good book. Maybe build houses. Do something. Use your skill set and say, you know what? In order for you to have my valuable skill set, you have to pay me in Bitcoin. Well, now you just created something of value there that's way better for both yourself and the world than just sitting on Bitcoin and hoping you get rich because you bought your HODL T-shirt and sat there with your Ledger Nano and never used the blockchain for anything but that.
Yeah, that is awesome. That was awesome last words. I was going to come back with something else, but I want to leave it at that because that was perfectly said, and I think a great way to end the show now. Thank you, Kurt. Thanks a lot for coming to the show. Really appreciate it. Had a great time and loved the conversation. I'd love to have you back for more discussions and maybe even sometime crack some of those conspiracy theories and some of those other things we could dig into. But thanks again. And if nothing else, we'll wrap up now. And thanks everybody for watching out there. I'm Dan from Crypto Camacho. If you like this kind of video, if you like this type of content, if you like what Kurt said, want to know more about his business, definitely go ahead and leave a comment below. Click on the like button, and we will get you some information about that. Thanks again, guys, for joining and tuning in. We'll talk to you next time. See you guys.